Welcome to the Promise Podcast, where we discuss how brands can deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. I'm your host, Harald Lamberts, and in each episode, I talk to business executives, thought leaders, and founders about how to achieve effective collaboration across departments, such as brand, marketing, product development, customer experience, and support, all with one goal in mind: a seamless customer journey with great business results. Today, we're thrilled to have Jeannie Walters on the show, an expert in CX with a unique perspective on creating business impact. Welcome, Jeannie.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Nice to have you on the show. Of course, we'll do a proper introduction, but before we do that, let's dive straight in. Can you name your favorite brand and explain to us why that is?
Well, let me put a little context here because I always struggle with favorite because that can change, right? Based on how they behave, what you're looking for, all those things. So I will say one of my favorite brands is REI, which is an outdoor retail cooperative. And one of the things that I love about them is that they really live their mission with their customers. And I think that's really respectable.
So you feel that in everything they do, like in all the small details? Is that what you mean? Yeah, cool. All right. Do you have a shop close by?
I don't have one as close as I need it to be, and I'm not super outdoorsy. I love hiking. I love certain things, but I'm not really a camper or a fisher or anything. But I do like their online presence. They do a nice job there. And I know that whatever I get from there is high quality.
They feel really authentic.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
I'm familiar with them. Okay, well, thanks for that. So yeah. Let's get started with the formal side of things, and let me introduce you real quick. So Jeannie Walters is a well-known CX professional with over 30,000 followers on LinkedIn. Congratulations. Passionately inspiring CX professional with tangible advice and online trainings to apply in their daily work. But besides sharing her knowledge online, she is also the CEO of Experience Investigators, a CX consultancy based in the US. And she's also been an active podcast creator herself for years. So with that, welcome, Jeannie. And I'm super excited to have you on our podcast and hope we're doing well.
Thank you. I love talking to fellow podcasters. So this is fun for me.
Let's spread the word. So that was, of course, the formal introduction also to give you the credit that you deserve. Can you maybe add to that a little bit in your personal introduction as to how things started and how you really got excited about being a CX professional?
Sure. Yeah. I think, I've been in this profession more than 20 years now. In Experience Investigators, my company we're celebrating our 15th year anniversary this year. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about this profession is that we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different experiences because most of us did not tell our first grade teacher that we were going to be a CX professional. That was not on the plan. So I have a typical journey with that where I was in fundraising consulting and then more traditional marketing. And it was really in that marketing consultancy that it was the dawn of when things started coming out between customers and brands. So it was really when the internet took hold and when social media started, where suddenly customers had a voice and a direct access point, where in the point before that, they really didn't in a lot of cases. So we started realizing this is more than marketing. This is more than communications. This is something bigger. And what got me really excited about it was I saw all these opportunities where suddenly we didn't have to treat customers like they were something outside of the business. We could really bring them in and talk directly to them. And one of the stories I like to tell is when I was working with a regulated industry, property and casualty insurance here in the United States, and I had to go, toe to toe with their chief legal counsel because he couldn't get it in his head that we could just say you when we were talking to the customer. Because for years, they had said the insured in all of their contracts and everything. And so that conversation, I remember just thinking this is what's next. This is where we are, where everybody's entrenched in the way things have always been done. And we have this amazing opportunity to really connect with people and give them information in a more straightforward way so that they can live better lives. And so the mission of my company from the beginning has been to create fewer ruined days for customers. And that's because I really believe that makes a better world for all of us.
And when was this, Jeannie?
So I started this company in 2009. That experience was when I was with the more traditional marketing firm. We actually shifted. I was partners there with my brother, and we shifted to become a customer experience firm by the time we wrapped up.
So you saw the opportunity to really do things differently as a company and actually more human, I guess, but also much less inside out, I guess, with this perspective. Yeah, wonderful.
Exactly.
So how did you start? What were the early days of experienced investigators like? How did you start the business? What were the first few years like? What type of work did you do?
Well, this is when I always think like, wow, I wish I had a better plan back then, because I just kind of started, right? Like many entrepreneurs do. I was like, oh, let's try this. And it was a different time, 2009. So I actually found one of my first big clients on Twitter just by answering questions, just by being helpful. And that's when I really realized that the value that I could bring in content and in just connecting with people virtually, there was a lot of opportunity there. So I kind of joke that I spent the first decade of the company just figuring stuff out, right? Like that's what we all do in this field. And the reason it's called Experienced Investigators is because I love that. I love figuring out what's really going on here. And there are always kind of places to dig into, right? When we're doing this work, we see feedback from customers and we think, why is that happening? Let's figure that out. We talk to different employees who have great ideas, but we can't figure out how to overcome all the stuff inside the organization to make it happen.
It's funny, isn't it? Because when you're a customer yourself, you expect a lot from companies. And then when you're on the company side, all of a sudden it will be different. I don't know why. So it's actually pretty obvious. But then how to operationalize it, of course, is a challenge. All right, wonderful. Well, thanks for that introduction. And I think all entrepreneurs, including myself, can completely sympathize with the I just got started and I had no clue what I was doing phase of being an entrepreneur. So thank you for sharing that vulnerability. All right, so then after that, of course, you've been busy for years and years. Like this whole podcast series is about achieving real impact. In the last 5 years or so, can you name like a very strong example where you think, okay, that's really where we made tangible business impacts? And that is not only a customer experience benefit, but also really a business benefit.
Yep. Yeah, I think this is the crux of the challenge that a lot of customer experience leaders have, is that sometimes they're tasked with the wrong goal. And one of the things that we do is we always take a 3-part approach, and we start with mindset. How do you create a culture that is customer centric and really everybody understands who are you supposed to be for your customers? Because otherwise you're asking every single individual to just guess. Really. And so we always start there. Then we move into strategy, which is where we develop a plan of action. We tie it back to organizational goals. We really get serious about what we're doing. And then that has to move into discipline. What are the efforts, the daily requirements of different teams and people to make that happen? And so we were working with a really large B2B organization. They're a global organization. And they were really trying to invest in customer experience. But it was so complex because they didn't quite understand what they were tasked to do. They were pulling in people from different teams and saying, you're working on customer experience now, right? Like that's what you're doing. But some of them were engineers, some of them were chemists, some of them were just, in field distribution. So maybe didn't quite understand, what are we trying to do? And so we started working with the leadership team there on really understanding, who are we, what are we trying to do, and who should be involved. It's work I'm very proud of because we really saw the transformation of understanding this isn't about sending surveys, right? And then hoping for the best. This is about understanding that if we can speed up delivery, which is one of the things that we identified, if we can speed up delivery for customers, that will lead to more repeat purchases, longer contracts, more renewals. we were able to really tie things together that way in a way that they had not even been thinking about. And so we were able to make that sort of impact. But the other side of that impact was really what was happening with those teams. They started seeing their work in more meaningful ways. They started seeing the connections between what they were doing and other teams were doing and how it impacts the customer. And that was something that, I still feel very good about. And I'm very, very proud of those leaders because this takes courage. You have to stand up. You have to define things differently. And I was very proud of that team as well.
We see it a lot actually as well, that there's lots of micro initiatives already going on, which all in itself are valuable, but could be quite reactive and maybe miss the strategic continuity or something like that, or coherence, if you will. And you don't want to really slam the door on those micro initiatives because they're all with the right intentions, but they lack maybe coordination or strategic coherence, as I said. So it sounds like you also went to the management to really make it more strategic, to make also make sure that all these great efforts were actually adding up. Is that fair?
Right. And I think you bring up an important point about, if you're doing a lot of different things, sometimes it's hard to prioritize. It's hard to understand where should we put our resources. And so if you don't have that strategic vision and plan tied to actual business results, then everything feels like a priority. And yet people won't look at that and say, wow, you really saved the company money. They'll say, great job on that little thing. And they don't really connect all that. So as CX leaders, it's really our job to articulate and define customer experience as a winning strategy. It is not a cost center. When I hear that, I go crazy because people assign it as a cost center, and it's really a strategic way to win in business.
It can be a cost center, but then you're basically not there yet, because then it just means that has actually not any strategic tie yet, basically, I guess. So, all right, great. So, that's very good. And also, I guess, a lot of those more like fragmented initiatives are almost always like optimizations and rarely differentiations. So I would also say, because ultimately differentiating should be brand relevant, right? Because otherwise, why are you differentiating? And for brand relevance, I guess you need some sort of strategic anchor, and that also the management supports with if you want to have any chance of orchestrating across all of your teams. Can you say something about what the management then signed up for? Was that basically committing to a strategic objective, or was it committing to specific results? So like, what was it that they did that made it work?
So there was a long tail, as you can imagine. This wasn't something that happened in a month. This was something that they had to build and evolve.
Of course.
But one of the things that I thought was really compelling was because one of the complaints that comes up, and this isn't just for them, and I'm not naming them, but this is true for many, many B2B organizations. It's just too complex to be a customer, right? It's too complex to even pay your invoice sometimes because there are all these different systems and people, and they send out communications that don't really read like English. Like they read like robots wrote them. And so one of the things we did was really try to figure out how can we operationalize simplicity for the customer. And we were able to take that starting, you have to start small at these big places. So we started with what's the biggest pain point? And the biggest pain point in this situation was really about invoicing and contracts. And so we were able to look at that and say, what if we could speed up that process? What if we could make that simpler for the customer? What if we could take some of that kind of load, the effort off of the customer? And they were looking at all of these different systems that were very internally focused about efficiency. And we were able to kind of change that conversation and say, we need to look at this, yes, for our efficiency, but also for the efficiency of our customers. And we were able to really change that conversation so that when they did make that decision about having a new system in place, it was not only to be efficient for the organization, but also to make things simpler for the customer. And then we were able to track that timing and say, how fast are we signing contracts now? How many renewals are we getting? And tie that all back to the efforts around really listening and understanding what are the customers struggling with and what can we do about it. And one small point I want to make there is that it's very easy in these big industries for people to say, well, that's how everybody does it. That's just how our industry is. We're
Sure.
regulated, we've got rules, we've got laws, all these things. There's always something. And that's the mindset shift that you have to work on too, because if you just resign to it, I like to say, if you are not disrupting your industry, somebody else will be. They are right now. They are planning your demise right now.
I was going to say, I mean, customers are not people who should follow your process. Customers
Right.
are people who you want to serve.
That's
So,
right.
and then if you then in that process try to be as efficient as possible, of course, but a huge mindset change, I think. Yeah. So, and that, I like your initial example of the language of the insured,
Mm-hmm.
making it almost like a legal entity rather than somebody you're trying to have a loyal relationship with, which
Yep.
is ironic, to be honest. Cool.
Yeah. But
Wonderful
we see it all
example.
the time, right? We see it
Yeah,
all the
yeah, yeah.
time.
It's not, I mean, we joke about it, but it's not uncommon. Yeah, for sure. All right. So one thing I noticed also on your website is like delight your CFO and make it easy on your sales team. And I like
Mm-hmm.
those because, show business impact and maybe
Mm-hmm.
reduce customer service costs, but also make referral work for you instead of having to put a lot of effort into active sales to get somebody sold. So I like that. Another thing that I'd really liked, and I'm moving on to like framework or approach, is I've in a few posts that you've done, and actually I think this is how we got connected, is the word intentional that you use. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that because I'm all about making strategic differentiation in your experience rather than just fixing what is broken. Yeah? So journey management or customer journey work is not just fixing what is broken, but also you should also have an objective or like an
Mm-hmm.
ambition. And I read that into that. But maybe you can say a few words about why you chose that word intentional initiatives or intentional experience, because I really like, because it makes it, yeah, in my how I read it, it makes it more strategic and brand relevant.
That's right. Yep. I have seen a lot of organizations that treat customer experience as a reactive part of the business. And when you're doing that, you're again, it's hard to prioritize that way because there's always something, right, that comes in and you have to react to. But if you are not proactive and intentional about the experience you want to deliver for your customers, it is very difficult to really get the return on that investment that you want. And frankly, we can't be all things to all people. We can't have a brand that serves everyone. We have to get clear on who are we, what are we delivering, what is our promise no matter what. Because if we do that, then as we have to make those decisions in those moments of reactivity, because they will still happen, we have a guide, we have a North Star, we have a way that we've all agreed this is who we are, this is what we're trying to do. And that's why we're making this decision. And I think that when we look at some of the brands that have had missteps, it's because people thought they understood what they were getting. They thought they understood who the brand was. And when the brand can't deliver on that, a lot of times it's because they become too inside focused. They've focused on process and efficiency to the detriment of their customers. And so we need, as customer experience leaders, we need to constantly look ahead and think about what do our customers need? How can we deliver that? How can we stay ahead of their expectations? And how will that bring success back to our organization? And I just think it's part of business that people they haven't learned about it. We don't talk about it that way. And that's why I'm a big believer that when people say customer service, that's that reactive part that's very, very important to any organization. But that is part of this bigger idea of a proactive, intentional customer experience.
100%, yeah. Because I think if you start addressing customer concerns, of course that is a good thing. But if that's all you do, then basically you're commoditizing yourself to the
Yep.
rest of the industry, because the other your benchmark and your competitors will do the same. And then
Yep.
ultimately, what's differentiating you? If it comes to, for example, a lack of differentiation between in certain commodity industries, really there's only not much left than price to really differentiate on. So I think with intentional, a brand relevant intentional experience, you can really also connect on an emotional level to say, hey, I think what you're saying with REI in the beginning is a good example of you just have a really good feeling with them and their authenticity on top of maybe some functional benefits that they might offer.
And
So
I
yeah.
think to that point, though, they also live it in their actions, right? And one of the things that they started was this whole idea of opt outside. And that's because that's who they are. And so here in the United States, Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, is this huge event for retail. And back in, I think it was 2015, they started saying, you know what, we are not going to open our stores on Black Friday because that's not fair to our employees. That's not living our mission. We want customers to get outside for the long weekend and all of those things. So it's things like that that I think really resonate with people. And especially today, as the younger generations come up, they are saying, I will shop my values, and they are doing their homework on that. And so that's why it's so important to be proactive about saying, this is who we are and this is what we do, so that people can find that fit for themselves.
And it gives a statement like that, gives all the teams guidance in their micro decisions that they're taking every day on, can we do this or can we do that? And they don't have to go check up with management all the time, because you're giving them proper guidance on how to interact with customers on a daily basis. So I think that ultimately, but it needs orchestration, of course, because you can't just expect everybody to understand that. So it needs some sort of like clear framework and orchestration to also make sure. I'm not sure if you have any idea on how they do that, but I think that that is something that of course would be worth would be interesting to know. How do brands, successful brands, do that? How do they actually translate their brand positioning or brand strategy into like micro interactions? Because that's obviously very often we see a huge gap between that. What goes out in a campaign or a TV ad is not necessarily reflected into the customer experience that you have when you buy actually something. I'm sure you see the same in action.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we started developing what we call a customer experience mission statement, because what we found was a lot of the corporate mission statements don't talk about customers at all. And they don't really give that guidance of who are we. If you think about what we're asking people to do in the moment when they are with a customer, or even when they're designing a product or anything like that, we're asking them to bring their life experience to what they're doing. And you and I might have very different life experiences. So we might both think we're right? We might both think that the right way to treat people is X. And there might be cultural differences. There might be all sorts of different ideas about, is it better to be fast or is it better to be accurate? Should we be honest or not? Like sometimes it's that simple. If they don't have that guidance, then we might make different decisions that, again, aren't necessarily right or wrong, but they're not consistent then for the customer. And they're not really showing up in the way that maybe the brand promise tells you to show up. So that's why you really need to make sure people understand this is who we are no matter what. And this is what we're trying to do. And that's where that strategy piece comes in, because then you can translate that into, okay, if our CEO said we are looking to get more market share, that's our goal this year. Well, that means we have to get customers from competitors. That's really what that means. And so how can customer experience efforts tie back to that? Well, that's where you go into, okay, well, we're hearing all this stuff about how people hate the mobile app or how people hate the product, and so yes, there's fix in there. But then you look at what are they really saying and why are they attracted to these other competitors, and how can we really make change within the experience so they feel more connected to our brand in the long term. So you really have to break it down. And I think that's the part that, whenever I'm on a plane or something and I say I do this work, and I'm sure this happens to you too, people say, oh, customer service is just the worst. And I'm like, yep. And I just sit there and hear about their story.
This is why. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And they have no idea what goes into the background. And so that's what we have to do as leaders, is really lead those efforts so that we can be strategic, we can live the mission, and we can deliver on that every day.
Yeah, I like that, because also you refer to gaining market share as an ambition, because I think if you're purely focused on loyalty and keeping your customers happy, of course, then you might shift a bit towards more optimizing what you have. But especially if you want to gain new customer base or grow the customer base, then of course brand preference is super important. And then you're not going to get that because they're not yet a customer yet if you only focus on fixing what is broken. So I think also really being a brand and living the brand is then crucial, of course.
Absolutely.
Okay, back to your favorite brand, REI. Is that can you name a few examples then how they live that? Like, is it an ad or exposure or things? You mentioned one actually before of not working on Black Friday, but is there other things that you maybe experience that you feel okay? I don't know what they do internally, but I'm liking it.
I think one thing to just be honest about here is they've had a couple of rough years. They have not had as much success in the last couple of years as they did in the past, but they've had a lot of success with things like opt outside because they took a huge risk with that and customers rewarded them anyway. They said, we respect you. We're going to order on days that aren't Black Friday, right? Like we're going to go into your stores on other days. And because of that, they've really been able to live that. And they reported all these sales going up. And in the last couple of years, that hasn't happened. Now, the reason I bring that up is because right now I'm watching them for how they actually turn their kind of mission into those business practices now when things are a little more challenging in the market. And so they are starting to make some announcements about leadership changes, and they're bringing in some people from brands like Sephora, which is another great brand that builds on loyalty and really connects with customers. So they're really trying to kind of revitalize that connection. And the other thing I have always appreciated about that brand is that their mission is really about, and I'm going to paraphrase it so it's not perfect, but some basically a life well lived is lived outdoors, basically. That's what they're saying. And because of that, they make sure that the people in the stores are trained to really educate people. So if you go in there and you say, well, I need a kayak and I've never gone kayaking, there's somebody there who can walk you through, well, what kind of things are you doing and what fits? And, these are your options. And I think that that is another way that they are living that mission, is that they are making sure that it's not about we want to sell as many products. It's about we want to educate. It's also a little bit different model because they're a co-op. So they have different financial levers to pull. But I really get excited about the fact that they are still investing in not only the leadership, but they announced a bunch of new stores in places that they thought, well, these people live outdoors anyway, right? Like a couple in Colorado and California and New York, and they are investing in what they really believe. And I believe that will pay off for them. So yeah, I mean, it's a
Proactive and
complicated world right
intentional.
now,
Yeah, it's
right?
like they're not trying to please everyone, but and then you're going to lose some customers, but and then
Right.
at least you believe in being a real personality as a brand and creating like unbeatable loyalty in the long run instead of transactional focus in the short term. But of course, it needs also some guts at the leadership to make those decisions, I think. Yeah. All right, wonderful. One thing that we always like is always great to hear success stories, but we also like to learn from mistakes, and we all made them. Is there a
Mhm.
mistake that you remember in your career where you think, oh, I learned so much from that and I never did that again? Can you
Yes.
share that with the audience?
Yeah, this was something that involved a rollout, a digital rollout, and it was a big company, and we were working to, go against frankly, an arbitrary deadline. And this happens too, right? The leader says, this has to be done by May 1st. And everybody says, okay. So everybody's scrambling to get it done. And essentially, we didn't include the frontline people who would be interacting with this in a different way. We didn't include them to really understand what is the customer experience today that you see. So we were using customer data and feedback and all of that. But as you know, people say one thing and they behave differently. And so the people who are closest to that were the frontline workers, the cashiers, the salespeople, folks like that. And we didn't include the right mix of those people when we were designing this process. And that is something that I am adamant about now, that we have to include the people who are closest to that customer experience, who see it with their own eyes, who have observations that they can bring to the table, because that will help us get closer to the ideal experience for the customer faster. And I think we still see this happening. I saw this not too long ago with a major retail chain here where they designed a new pay on your app experience, and they forgot to tell the cashiers. And so the cashiers, when the pilot was happening, customers were
Forgot.
just waving their phone with a cart full of stuff saying, I paid. And the cashiers had no idea how to, is
Well,
that true? And how do I
an
deal with
excellent
that?
example, Jeannie, of working in silos, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
that's like a complete symptom. And I mean, nobody does this intentionally. It's just
Right.
when you're in this tunnel vision of delivering something that you're being tasked with a tight deadline, you just forget to look laterally and say, okay, who do I need for that to make it a success, actually? So this is now something very conscious on your mind when you start anything? Like, who do we need
Yes.
to
I
make it
mean,
happen?
we are pretty adamant about making sure that we have the right people in the room. And sometimes it is challenging to actually get customers involved because some organizations just don't have access or don't have the right resources or what
Or
have you.
legally not allowed to, yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So, you can rely on customer data to a point, but then you want real people who have experienced things. And that's why bringing in those people who are closest to it is so vital.
Yeah, and not
to
inform
success.
the people who actually have to do it at the last minute and
Right.
unveil the secret. I mean, that's not a great idea, I know.
Right.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. And then onto, I mean, the theme of this whole podcast series is impact. Like, what impact do you have right now? Where do you really get the satisfaction from when you come home happy and you feel like, oh, really, I impacted someone today? Can you share some stories about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the things I love to do is keynote speaking and education. And we do a lot on content and online, as you know. And I always love that moment when somebody goes, like, now I get it, right? Like this impacts me directly. So that's just like that moment of, it's a dopamine hit for me when
That's
you
what I
get
meant,
people
yeah.
to see that. But then I also think that when we talk about impact, we're really talking about, again, helping leaders step into this role of really leading, because customer experience is often seen as this extra thing or this soft thing or this reactionary thing. And when we get leaders to understand the impact that they're having every day, if they can step into that role and really lead, that gets me very excited too, because I really, really in my bones know that if customer experience is treated like any other part of the business, like sales or marketing or operations, like something that matters and that needs discipline, then the impact is not just a win for customers. It's a win for the employees and it's a win for the organization. And so we need to start speaking in those terms. We need to start designing things to make sure that we are reflecting the different impacts that we have, and we need to own it and we need to step into that role. And so that's what I love too. Sorry, my allergies are acting up. You're making me cry.
We're going very deep here. But
Yes.
no, but I mean, ultimately, sales also has to sell to a customer and not to anyone else. So, I mean, really, it's not, and that's also why I think CX makes it exciting, but also a complicated discipline, is because it touches everything is great, but it's also difficult because it touches everything. So
that's absolutely right.
So yeah, wonderful, and thanks for sharing that. Then, of course, I'm interested, if you were to watch the next episode of this podcast, who would you love to see in it? Do you have a recommendation for someone we should try to lure into the show?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to use an example of somebody I recently had on my podcast. And one of the things I like to do is kind of look a little beyond CX and who are the leaders. And so one of my favorite speaker authors is Rohit Bhargava, he talks about non-obvious trends. And he's just a super smart guy. And we had a great conversation. And I think, part of our CXI Navigator framework is there are 4 parts. And one of the parts is about experiential innovation. Like, why are we doing this? We're doing this to stay ahead. And so I think that's a conversation that we need to have more of. And he can add a lot to that. And he has a great book out right now with a co-author. And it's all about non-obvious trends. So check that out.
And can you give an example of non-obvious trends? Like, what would that be?
He has a way of looking at the world so that you can kind of see the bigger trends happening. And one of the points of conversation we had was like the difference between a fad and a trend, right? So looking at things like layering, how do we layer things like concern about the economy with how people are experiencing more dedication to sustainability, more, and really getting into what does that mean overall for all of us.
Almost like the underlying trend that is going on, like more need-based trends that are going on.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
So
I've seen that in a technique called scenario planning as well, where you really are more trying to predict. You can't really predict, but you're trying to minimize the risk of what the evolution of your service offering might actually have to be.
That's right.
All right. Well, wonderful. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll just add one thing, which is I think we're in an interesting time of almost evolution right now, because some of the things that we used to rely on, like past behavior predicts future behavior, is no longer as solid as it used to be. And people are making very different choices. And so we have to, as CX leaders, we really have to make sure we are looking at the landscape beyond what our data tells us and beyond what our numbers tell us and even what our customers are telling us, because humans are changing and we have to keep up with that.
Yeah, and the real-time personalization capabilities that are emerging.
Yes.
Yeah, and how to apply those without going crazy on them, of course, and losing focus as an organization. That's also a complex balance to strike, I guess, but also a great opportunity if you apply it intentionally. I will end with that. So I think everything needs orchestration and strategic focus, I think. Otherwise, you end up quickly with fragmented, scattered initiatives everywhere. And even though they're meant with the right intentions, they don't really add up sometimes. So I think that's maybe a red thread that we have been discussing today. So I really appreciate that. And I'm just going to ask you one more thing, and it's to the audience, like, what is your, closing message? Like, what is the one thing that you would give our listeners with them home as take-home value to apply in their work?
Well, I think the big thing to remember is that customer experience is nuanced, it is intentional, it is proactive. And we have a tool on our site called the CXI Compass. I would invite everybody to check that out because it really helps figure out what should your priority place be in all of these different areas. And that's what I see a lot of leaders struggle with. So I would love to, offer that. But I think just keep leading, like really step in and lead as a business leader. Get that respect that you deserve, because every single CX professional is changing the world. And I never want us to forget that.
100%. CX is not about just fixing stuff, but about differentiating your brand. So I love that. Thanks, Jeannie. And thanks so much for your time. And we'll take the learnings and away from this. And I'm sure everybody is really inspired by both your practical tips, but also the authentic passion with which you presented this. So thanks so much for being on the show. So that was another episode of the Promise Podcast, where we discuss effective ways for brands to deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a review. Check haroldlammers.com for more great content. Hope to see you again in the next episode. Until then, keep pushing to deliver on the promise.